Welcome everyone to 1 hour of webinar by the Renewable Carbon Initiative with the title Success Stories RCI 2025 and a brief outlook to 2026. In the following hour, my co-executive manager Michael and myself will give you a dense overview of what RCI has been working on in the past year. We'll provide a little bit of what we believe are success stories of RCI. We provide you a little bit with an outlook of what's going to happen or what topics we are addressing in the next year. We have a webinar style here, so you are very much invited to use the Q&A option to ask questions or also to raise your hand, and we're happy to unmute you, and then you can ask your question live if you prefer that. Because I believe we will not be too many that it gets unwieldy, feel free to raise question anytime, and Michael and I will take a look at the questions and interrupt each other to make sure that the questions are asked when it's on the right slide so that you'll get a direct answer on the different questions. You should see my screen, and with that, I would jump into the presentation because as I highlighted, we have brought quite a bit of slides to today's meeting. First of all, just for those who might not be aware or who have not heard of RCI before, you see here on the left-hand side the vision of RCI, and that is to address the main cause of anthropogenic climate change for the chemical derived materials sector at the feedstock level. So we are intending and aiming to facilitate the transition from fossil carbon to renewable carbon as the feedstock for organic chemicals and materials. And with renewable carbon, we mean carbon that can come from biomass, from carbon capture and utilization, or from recycling, so that it replaces virgin fossil and provides a future-proof option or pathway towards a sustainable chemical and derived materials industry. On this slide here, you see the first batch of members of RCI. We've separated them into large suppliers, SMEs, and then you might have taken note already on the second slide, we separated them into then brands, startups, research institutes, and a growing list of partners of the initiative. For us, it is very useful to have such a diverse group of members across the entire value chains. Just when you look at the brands, you see that we have end consumer level with, for example, the automotive industry, the toy industry, furniture industry, textiles industry. Procter and Gamble is one of the largest producers of fast-moving consumer goods, etc., etc. So we really trying to bring together as many different stakeholders and parts of the value chain into RCI to ensure we have really a high-level overview that's comprehensive, where the experts from different sectors can come together. And it has been working very well so far. I'll try to set the stage a bit by showing you some success stories of 2025, so some highlights. And I think one highlight to mention, or the first to mention here, is the rather active policy involvement of RCI by now. We've started addressing the policy, the EU policy level in particular, and with the first publication in 2022. And since then, we are continuously traveling to Brussels, talking to, in particular, the Commission level. And I think it is reflected here in the involvement in different experts group that RCI participates by now. And I've put up here the four, or maybe the four largest one we're actively working in. One is the Environmental Footprint Technical Advisory Board, which is developing the product environmental footprint and organizational environmental footprint methodologies of the European Commission. That is life cycle assessment and rules for life cycle assessment. We have been involved since the beginning of this year, since they've re-invited new people to the Technical Advisory Board. It was over 10 meetings this year, so quite the intensive work that we have in there. But in that context, we are, of course, working on fine-tuning life cycle assessment methodologies to better reflect realities for renewable carbon. I've highlighted here the -1+ methodology so that if you use biogenic carbon and LCAs, you do get a credit for the uptake from the atmosphere, and then at end of life, you have to count the emission. But it really helps in the complex value chains to visualize the benefit of uptake. Right, the next expert group we are involved in is the Eco Design Forum, which is the expert group that belongs to the Eco Design for Sustainable Products Regulation. You might be aware of those energy graphs, for example, that's come from the Eco Design Directive. But the idea here is to develop indicator or determine indicators in the line on indicators needed for sustainable product assessment. That is then for different product groups, and it involves chemicals, it involves cosmetics, it involves lubricants, paints, plastics, textiles, and more. At the moment, the Eco-Design Forum is focusing on a few other products, mainly iron, aluminum, steel, but also textiles. So the work is kicking off there. But overall, expect us to be involved in working on these indicators and rules for what are sustainable products in the different product groups. Maybe to take note of is the digital product passport that is part of the ESPR, where in the future the European Commission is looking to mandate the use of such digital product passports with relevant key information readily accessible then. And we will be involved in discussing what should be in there for the product groups that I mentioned here. Next in line is the Critical Chemicals Alliance that will be starting in January 2026. And we've just received the confirmation that we're on board. It's a bit the follow-up of work that has been done before in the chemical transition pathway of the European Commission and work on the EU Chemicals Industry Action Plan. We are consistently engaged with the unit at DG Grow, so the industry unit at the Commission, working on chemicals and bioeconomy. And so here we are involved going forward also in the Critical Chemicals Alliance. And you see in the different documents that are coming out of the transition pathway, the Chemicals Industry Action Plan, that the main topics, the RCI stands for defossilization of chemicals and the different feedstocks, are anchored in those different documents. And then finally, there's the Industrial Carbon Management Working Group that is mainly looking at dealing with CO2. So in that working group, we focused on carbon capture and utilization and not so much on the in the transport infrastructure or on CCS. But we are looking at the utilization of carbon, of course, because we need it as a feedstock again. And here we supported this year the work on a white paper that enables or how to enable CCU. We are continuously involved in topics about carbon management and thinking it more comprehensively. It is very often nowadays more on where to store the carbon, how to get rid of carbon, and not so much on carbon as a feedstock. But we stay engaged, and there's just today and yesterday was the large meeting of the ICM forum in Greece. And just that you're aware, we are involved in those different groups and actively participating and providing our input in shaping the discussions. I'll stick with policy because we believe a lot has happened. So there's a lot of direction changing at the Commission level. It's a maybe too comprehensive overview, but just for you to see that this year quite a bit changed towards, yes, the fossilization of the chemical industry makes sense. And yes, we want to make it happen. I'll start with the high-level document, which was the Clean Industrial Deal, where we supported the entire Clean Industrial Deal and the work on that with the work we done in the years before, but also by signing the Antwerp Declaration. If you look at the Clean Industrial Deal, it mentions the fossilization of the chemical sector. So that was a good start into the year as a high level. What's the agenda of the Commission for the next 5 years? Then zooming a bit more in, we have the packaging waste regulation, where we in frequency exchange with relevant units at DG Env, at DG Grow, etc. We provided a position on sustainability criteria for biomass used in materials, chemicals, packaging, etc. And overall, we see that the PPWR is open to chemical recycling for recycled content targets. It's investigating bio-based content targets as an addition to increasing the circularity in the packaging sector. And that is encouraging to see. Just 2 weeks ago, the update to the bioeconomy strategy was published. Again, we have been intensively in exchange with relevant units, in particular with DG Env. But I'm not sure if you've seen the strategy, but it is a marked shift in what the Commission has done before on the bioeconomy strategy. And it's very solidly developing towards enabling industrial bioeconomy. So that is very positive to see from our end. I've already mentioned the action plan for the chemicals industry. We are consistently in exchange. I mentioned it supports the core messages of RCI, but that was also published this year. And again, the shift away from fossils is mentioned also in that action plan. We saw in light of the Single-Use Plastics Directive, there was an implementing decision working on details on realizing the directive, where we submitted also feedback on the topic because there they were defining, or the Commission was working on defining rules for mass balance and attribution. There will be very likely more discussion to follow on that front because what the Commission prepared and provided is not fully aligned with what ISO is doing, and there are back and forth, pros and cons for different fine tuner or finer elements of the methodology. But overall, we also here see that chemical recycling is considered to be an option and that mass balance rules are worked out to implement and realize this opportunity. And then finally, two documents that are not out yet, but of interest are the Circular Economy Act, where we did provide input to the first public consultation. That was a minor and short one, but principally keep an eye out on that because it can and there's indication that they are looking to bridge circular economy and the bio-based economy, and we are also advocating for CCU in that concept. And then the IDAA at the bottom, also first public consultation was out. It's supposedly looking to address market pull measures for clean carbon, which is the same as renewable carbon, and looking to establish lead markets. But we're a bit cautious to see whether it actually pulls through. Anyway, keep an eye out for those two documents and just for you to have an overview of what has been happening at EU level because we think there's a lot of development currently going on that's encouraging to see. Then branching out a little bit out of EU level, so we are mainly focusing at EU level, but we are also supporting the work in other policy streams. And I've brought you one example at the national level from the Netherlands, who published this year a national vision for sustainable carbon in the chemical industry that is fully aligned with RCI thinking. They call it sustainable carbon, but it's exactly the same what we mean with renewable carbon sources. So here shifting from fossil fuels to renewable carbon sources like recycled biomass and captured CO2. They are working on phasing out fossil feedstocks, and it's just very encouraging to see that besides the EU level, there's also European member states, EU member states who are actively developing the topic. And then on a higher international level, just a few weeks ago, the Clean Energy Ministerial Biofuture published a declaration on sustainable chemicals and materials that was connected to the COP30 work, where biofuels and then also sustainable chemicals and materials were a bit highlighted by different pledges and member states. Again, this declaration, you can find it here if you follow the link, but it's also strongly influenced by the above mentioned Dutch ministries, strongly based on RCI position that we published in the past, and we are also directly involved with the molecule group slash the SEM Biofuture Secretariat. And also here you see that bio-based, recycled, and captured carbon are put on the agenda. So a lot happening on the policy level. We have also started to more strongly address the frameworks surrounding the policy level. And in particular, we've reached out to the Science-Based Targets Initiative that was highlighted by several of our members as critical a topic to address. So we reached out to the SBTI and established connections with them. We had an RCI internal workshop in mid of summer. We had a public workshop at the Renewable Materials Conference, but with high participation from RCI members again. And in those discussions, we agreed and aligned with SBTI that the topic of embedded carbon and switching away from fossil is relevant also for setting climate targets for companies. And now we're into discussions with them on what can SBTI do to adapt the methodology to better enable the switch from fossil to renewable carbon. Key documents you might want to take a look at are the chemical sector guidance that just has an update published last week. It includes alternative feedstock targets. Again, with alternative feedstock, they mean exactly the same three feedstocks that we unite under renewable carbon. And the main standard document is the corporate net zero standard. Now version 2.0 is being developed, and SBTI actively invited us to provide feedback. We have to do that by end of the week. We are working on that RCI internally, and then going forward from there, we are looking to stay engaged, and we will stay engaged with SBTI, addressing the technical colleagues. So what can we change the methodology in detail, and also looking to address the greenhouse gas protocol as underlying standard setter for different footprints, etc. documents that are around on that front. And then finally, we are also trying to facilitate networking in RCI. And here we've launched a new format we called Roundtable, with the core idea that our members determine which topics they would like to present to the rest of the membership and then engage in exchange with all members on the topic. We had 3 roundtables that we hosted this year in July, in September, and October. You see the different host members and the topics on the slide. It was a pilot project to figure out how well it's appreciated and how well it feels in RCI and how well it facilitates networking, but it was taken up very positively. We had high participation, a lot of exchange, a lot of discussion, follow-up activities between the members. So going forward next year, we will continue with that forward, and we'll also look to open it up a bit to invite external experts to some meetings if there are specific topics of high interest to the membership that we can then bring into discussions in RCI. I've brought one slide. There's a question. I see it already, Florian. Is the roundtable openly accessible? Sorry, it's not. It's an RCI internal format to facilitate the networking and exchange. If there is a specific topic that's of high interest and you would be an expert on that topic, we might invite you, but otherwise it's not openly accessible to the wider public. On that slide, you see our we of course trying to figure out how satisfied are our members. So in alignment of our annual meetings, we send out a survey to all our members. And here you see on that slide for 6 different categories where we ask the question, how satisfied are you with overall RCI and aware of what RCI is doing? How aligned is what RCI is doing with what your company is trying to do? How do you value the membership? How do you value the quality of publications? How do you value our advocacy and presence in the field of policy? And how do you value the networking and event opportunities we offer you? And overall, you see here there was the option to be from very unsatisfied or from not satisfied to neutral to very satisfied. Overall, we believe we have high satisfaction rates, in particular on everybody being aware of what we do and what we're trying to achieve and the quality of our publications, but also alignment, value of membership, quite positive. And we have a bit more neutral feedback on the opportunity for networking and events. And we're, of course, then taking heart of this feedback and looking to improve that next year. But overall, the satisfaction rates seem to be very high. In discussions with our members, they also voiced that they are very happy and positive on their RCI membership and what they get out of it. Okay, I would hand over now to Michael to jump into, I think we have 5 or 6 publications that we brought to this webinar today, and Michael will jump into the first 3 or 4 in more detail. And with that, Michael, I would hand over to you, and the next slides are for you.
Yeah, thank you, Christopher. I would like to add 2 things before I start. The first is Christopher has said 50 times, I think, we did this, we are joining. And the question is, who is we? And the interesting RCI is, it's not the RCI office only, it's not the office and the board, it's open to all members. So when we're organizing feedback to SBTI, as an example, or feedback to the Commission, DG Environment, DG Climate, DG Grow, it's always the possibility for all members to be part of the feedback. We have the working group policy for that, but also the roundtable. So that means if you become member, you are fully involved in all these processes Christopher has shown, and it's not a thing some people do in RCI, others don't care about. Now everybody is invited, and many joining it. We're talking about, I think about 20, 40 members are very active in this policy feedback. And my second comment is the unique situation for RCI is that we are a science-based advocacy group, a think tank, and an interest group. And the base of this are our scientific background reports. The topics are chosen by the members. So 1 time a year in the General Assembly. This year it was November. We discussed about 20 proposals from members and have then finally a voting. And what you see now in my presentation, this was decided in the meeting in 24 as topics, and then the NOVA experts and the digital experts worked on these topics. And one of these projects, this is already from 24, but this is important for the next one in 25, so we have included this. This was the evaluation of recent reports on the future of net zero chemical industry in 2050. All this publication from RCI are also public available. You'll see the download link on the bottom, renewable-carbon.eu/publications. And here we have looked to a wide range of reports. We identified the best quality reports. And here in this case, this was about net zero chemical industry, main feedstock shares across 16 scenarios from 9 reports. And the interesting result is that meanwhile, also through the work of RCI, it's well understood that to replace fossil, we need biomass, we need CCU, and we need recycling. And in the case of chemical industry, there is also some fossil left over for CCS, but we see biomass 22, CCU 33, and recycling 20. When we look to the same situation, oh yeah, please, next slide. I cannot go to the next slide by myself. To plastics, then we see the picture is not very different, but recycling is here more in favor. And this is in line also with European policy, you know, the quotas in the packaging waste regulation. So for plastic, recycling is number one, but biomass CCU also are necessary for defossilization. Next slide. And this is a famous picture from Nova and RCI. Is going around the world. You can see it in China and in Brazil. This is one scenario, and I want to point out especially two things or three things. First is the carbon demand, the embedded carbon demand will double from today to 2050, mainly because of the increases in Asia or South America and Africa. In Europe, we have almost a constant carbon demand for embedded carbon in the molecules. This is the first message of the picture. The growth rate, compounded annual growth rate 2.5, is already smaller than the past. The past this was more 3.5. The second thing is our scenario here is fading out fossil completely. So we have no fossil feedstock left over in 2050. And then we have the three shares. Main feedstock is recycling, 55%. 50% is already recycled bio-based, CO2-based enrichulates. The 5% are still long-living fossil products. Then we have this 20% bio, and you see in the next report where we proved whether 20% is possible without compromising food, feed, and energy demand on bio. And then the gap is filled with CO2-based, 25%. This is not a limitation. In principle, you could also, if you have enough solar, wind, and hydrogen, you could also cover the demand of the global chemical industry by 2050, 100% by CO2-based. But we have recycling and we have bio, so CO2 is only necessary to fill the gap. And we have then in additional studies that we have proved these different pillars. Yeah, and another report also important to see finally whether enough biomass is there for the 20% was the competition to the fuel market. These are scenarios here which we have also discussed with DG Move and agreed to our scenarios here. So the title is here, EU and Global Biomass Demand for Transport, Fuels, Aviation and Shipping till 2050 and the implication for supply of the chemical sector. And here you see two parts. The down part is on bio and the upper part is on CO2 utilization. You see also that the demand for the classical biofuels, biodiesel and bioethanol in road will go to almost zero till 2050. Due to new decisions in the Commission and Parliament, it can be that a little bit more is left over, but anyway, it's strongly shrinking. And then you see biofuel Annex 9, second generation fuels. For marine, you have especially methanol made from, or biodiesel made from biomass, and also the bio-sustainable aviation fuels. On the top, you see different shares for marine and aviation from CO2. And these are very strong targets. So the target is finally to have 2050, 70% of the kerosene by alternative sources. This is really extreme, and we're fighting for that. We have also something like this for chemical sector in the future. Next slide, please. You'll see the exact quotas. In 25, it's only 2%, but then in the next years, it's going up to 70%. And the CO2 base is minimum 35, and maximum bio is 30, also 35. For marine, it's a little bit more complicated because this is directly related to the greenhouse gas emissions, but here is a clear trend to methanol or also ammonia. Next slide, please. So we have also some other scenarios where you see here's a strong CCU scenario. That means that CCU will cover more than 35%, and then of course the share of bio is lower. In the next slide, we have a strong ammonia scenario. This means that methanol from CO2 is partly replaced by ammonia, and this is not in the picture here because it's not a carbon fuel. Next slide, please. And here you see the demand. Interesting is the demand for biomass will increase from today, mainly for aviation fuels and marine applications. But you see here it's double or triple. So when we ask the question, what is left over for the chemical sector, we have all this data in mind, especially for second generation feedstock. Next slide. Yeah, this is another scenario, but in principle, it's always the same picture. We need 2 or 3 times more. Yeah, and now this was the biggest report we ever did for RCI. This was also financed by BIC, Bio-Based Industrials Consortium, and RCI. Both RCI and BIC asking at the same time, NOVA experts, could you make such a report? And then we try to put both together to have more budget and make it more in detail, because this really was a strong modeling exercise. So the question was, biomass available on a global and European scale for use in bio-based chemicals and plastics. Next slide. I'm not sure. Yeah, I have put one. Yeah, we don't need that. Sorry. Yeah, you can put the next, let's see, all lines directly. Yeah. Well, the project, sorry. This project was mainly done by NOVA, but in collaboration with modeling experts. This is Eurocare for agriculture modeling with Capri, and Thun Institute with a forest model. And we learned a lot in this project, how complex modeling is. Normally you think you make one set of assumptions, give it to the modeler, and then you are ready. But in reality, it's a feedback process over 1 year to understand the results, to change the assumptions, and so on. So a long way to go. But this was very useful. And if you see the results in a minute, it's so much more complex and in detail compared to many other reports with just some Excel sheets. And so this was really a very, very high quality exercise here. Next slide. Yeah. The main question was, is there enough biomass to defossilize the chemical and derived material sector by 2050? Can agriculture and woody biomass combined sustainably provide enough biomass to meet 20% of the future carbon demand of chemical derived materials in 2050, up from 5.5 in Europe today, and up coming from 10% globally? This is first surprising. So the share of biomass in the chemical industry in Europe is lower than on global level. This is firstly surprising, but there are 2 reasons for that. The first is in many countries who have much better biomass access than in Europe, number 1. Number 2, the cheap natural gas and oil from Russia made us very depending on this, and so there was not such a need to develop biomass applications. Next slide, please. Yeah, this was already a huge milestone. You can find all the publication free of charge on this page I showed before, renewable-carbon.eu/publications. So no need to make pictures now. You can get the full reports. In this case, the report is there are even sub-reports on this report, so a lot to download and take a look to. So this was the first milestone because this was very unknown. There was no publication on this. What is the chemical sector today consuming on biomass? And so this was a big exercise to ask a lot of companies and associations. And here's the result. The far leading biomass is starch, sugar, vegetable oils in world and in Europe. Compared to these huge streams, the others, animal fats, chemical pulp, glycerol, byproduct from biodiesel, used cooking oil, public fatty acid distillate, are really small compared to these leading ones. And so this was already a very important information that the chemical sector is strongly depending on so-called food crops or primary biomass. And you see also here, this will not change. especially because the second generation feedstock is completely consumed by the SAF policy in Europe. Next slide. Yeah, this is double. Just to say this, please go back for the second. We're only talking about carbon, this 20% you see here in the green, and the project was showing, is it possible to cover this 20% or more? And this is the main question of the project. Yeah, next slide. Here you'll see the situation for Europe on the left-hand side today, with a share of 5.5. You'll see the primary algal biomass is completely dominating the picture. Some byproducts, some woody input. In 2050, the total volume is ×4. The primary algal biomass, starch, sugar, and plant oil is lower than before. It's about 50%, but still the most important part of the biomass supply. And there is in the chat a question. Christopher, can you look whether the chat is...
No, there's no question.
Okay, okay, thank you. Byproducts are more, wood is more important in woody, especially in biorefineries. And we see also straw and bio-waste getting an important share. Today is almost zero. So this is a situation from the demand side, and then we have, of course, to model the supply side. Next. Yeah, one comment in between. This strong demand for food crops is not really a problem. It can even be supportive. And we see also the latest decision from DG Environment, also the European Investment Bank now opened again the door for using food crops. And here are a lot of different arguments why this is a good decision. But I want to highlight only one point here on food security. Food security is supported by using food crops for the chemical sector to a certain amount, of course not 100%, but when we talk about a share of 5 to 10%, it's supportive because of a few reasons I will show you. First is food crops have the highest land efficiency, so that means using food crops for industry needs less land compared to other crops. That's the first point. Then you need normally the carbohydrates or the plant oil. So the protein is a byproduct for the food crop production, and we are rare in proteins and not in sugar and starch. So this is also very supportive. Then we have more wheat and corn. Then we have an increased overall availability of edible crops. And then the most convincing point is fastest and cheapest way to ensure emergency reserves. That means if we have a hunger crisis, we have almost no storage in the world, no starch, no sugar, no plant oil storage. So we're running out empty in a very few weeks. And with industry using food crops, which can be redirected to the food market in a crisis, we have here a emergency reserve, which otherwise would not be there. And this worked already in France, in Germany, and Brazil. I will not go too detailed here. You can also download this report. But I think the understanding of food crops used in the chemical industry has changed a lot the last years, and here are additional arguments on it. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, I will not go here through all the things because this is a list of assumptions. Everything is transparent in the report. So I want just to give you a short view. There are many different things. I will only highlight one, which is not so well known. It's a cropping index. That means how much harvesting you have per hectare per year. And today it's per 0.96, so less than one time. We have in the world, in Asia areas, you can harvest 3 times a year. And so we have here the assumption that the value goes from below 1 to 1.05. This is very realistic, and this has a huge impact on additional biomass. To give one example, and so all the other things, I think, too much for today, but you can all read it in the report. Next slide. For Joe, it's the same long list. Next slide. Yeah, an important point is sustainability and biodiversity in the modeling. This assumption we have taken here. The first is for sustainability, we went back to the original definition from Brundtland in 1987. Sustainable development is a development that meets the need of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And this is exactly what we did here. That means when you see the results for 2050, there will also be possibly in 2060, 2070. So this is the basic idea here. The modeling is not able to account for whether biomass is produced in a certified sustainable way, by ICC, for example, but it does guarantee that it will be available in the long term. And I can also imagine that in 2050, all biomass should be certified, also food biomass, but this is outside of the modeling here. Biodiversity cannot be modeled directly in the Capri model. By the way, the Capri model is also used by DG Agri, so it's the official model the Commission is using, what we also used here. But there are several assumptions that strongly support biodiversity conservation, stop of deforestation in all scenarios by 2030, except business as usual. There's a little bit later. Land set aside for biodiversity protection, all scenarios 4 to 8%, except business as usual again. Land take for settlement and transport stops in all scenarios by 2030. So until 2050, land take is 3 times lower than in business as usual. And in most scenarios, we have lower meat consumption. But these are all things which are positive for environment and biodiversity. Next slide. The results from the scenarios here, I want to highlight. So we have different scenarios. Business as usual, we have scenario green, is a low research depletion scenario, organic farming, green high-tech scenario. So in all scenarios, we have additional biomass compared to today because we have increased efficiency, we have better yields for new varieties and so on. And so the biggest increase, of course, is the high-tech scenario, and the lowest is in the low research depletion scenario. But in all cases, we see more biomass. For example, in business as usual, cereals by 32%, sugar by 40%, and oil by 45%. And you can see in the report all the details why this is happening. Next slide. Yeah. Back for the, I can explain this in the next slide too. Yeah, it's easier next slide. So here you have the full results from all the modeling after 1 year modeling. The right column is showing the demand, and the left column shows the supply. The question was, in which scenario we can give 20% biomass to the chemical sector without compromising food, feed, and biofuels. And this is the case in scenario high-tech plus 10. You see it in the right from the middle. There, the share is 20% for the chemical industry. And this high-tech scenario means precision farming, drones, soil health, and all the things we can do today, agriculture. And for most experts, this is the most probably a way to go. So a very realistic scenario. If you go to extreme high-tech scenarios, then you can also go up to 30, 40%. But this is really extreme. This plus 10 is very realistic. And here the answer is finally yes. And you see also in the supply pillars, for me always very exciting, that cereals, sugar, vegetables, vegetable oil, and protein meal from oil seeds is about 80 to 90% of the production. So that also means if you take a little bit out of the stream, there's no impact on, also not on price level, because this is the amount of biomass is sugar, starch, and plant oil proteins. And this is also, again, here very clear in the modeling.
There's a question on the chat directed on this. What about global warming? Isn't it diminishing biomass supply?
Yeah, that's a very good question. We try to include impacts of global warming, but we could not find any report calculating net impacts. So we know that in the south some areas will be lost, but we see also that in the north some areas will, in Finland, in Sweden, in Russia, in Canada, there will be also additional land. and is hardly possible to have any net effect calculated. So we have not done this in this exercise here. What we did was, in the high-tech scenario, we have more tools to make tundra in the north agricultural land. So we added here a little additional land because of this ability of high-tech agriculture, but complete integration of global warming is not possible on a solid way. Next slide, please. This is a picture for Europe now. You see Europe is not the +10 scenario with high-tech +5, because in Europe we have already some high-tech agriculture implemented, so that we have not this additional increase compared to the global situation. You see also for Europe that the demand is higher than the supply. This is today the case, and it will be the same in the future, just because Europe is had a very dense population and not so much agricultural land per capita. So it's very realistic that we have still some imports, but not increasing on the same level than today. You see that biofuels, traditional biofuels, are very small share in the future. So chemical industry will be much more important than fuels in the future. The aviation fuel and the marine are coming from second generation. This is not covered here. Here is primary biomass. And you see also on the left picture in purple which shares of vegetable oil, sugar, or cereals we using for the chemical sector in Europe. Next picture, please. Yeah, a few comments on biomass and straw. What we also found out, so it is not so much available because this is mainly consumed by sustainable, by second generation biofuels and SAF. When we're taking all the cereals into consideration, it's really not enough there to meet the demand for fuels and chemicals. But we saw also that we have additional options to use corn and rice straw, what is today almost not happening in the world. So when we use these additional sources, then there is a relevant share of straw in the total biomass supply. And the assumption is also here that we only take 1/3 of the straw, because of soil health and logistics. It's not realistic to take more than 1/3. That's a comment to second generation. The next slide is showing what can also happen in the future. So we have all kind of what we have included here. Cellulose fibers are included, all kind of biochemical conversion, not only fermentation, but also other things like aerobic digestion and so on. Synthetic gas, so gasification is included here, methanol production, and also bio-oil and biochar in pyrolysis. So this is all included in the modeling, just to mention it. Next slide is the last slide, I think. Yeah, this is the last slide to sum up. The question was, is there enough biomass to meet the 20% demand in our scenario? Yes, is the answer. With a moderate high-tech agricultural system, it's possible. And when we would go to higher amounts, then it's getting tricky. Then we have to use extreme high-tech scenarios. And if you see on the bottom how much biomass we have to use for in Europe, for the primary agricultural biomass, it would be 8%, and for the forest supply, 3%. And this report, of course, is very important for the environment when they're now discussing quotas and bioeconomy updates. They need a solid base. Is there biomass available? And I think this report from RCI, NOVA, and PIC really was a big support here for policymakers.
Yeah, perfect. I'll take back over because the next couple of slides are on my
Or
desk
any
again.
question? Good question.
Right now, there are no questions. I'll keep an eye on the chat and the Q&A.
Okay.
If there are questions, don't hold back, and I'm happy to go back to your slides, of course. I would jump out of the more technical studies, scientific studies we did today, and this one is more on the policy side again. This was another very large study that started in 2024, and which we published in April this year. And it tackled policy proposals, because there's the main motivation that we have with RCI ever since we founded the RCI was the understanding that in order to facilitate really the transition from fossil to renewable carbon, we need a supportive policy framework. That is, of course, mainly explained by the fact that at the moment fossil feedstock is more competitive than the alternative options. And in order to facilitate a change, simply letting the market do its magic will not work out, and we need policy to interact here and enable the right direction, so to say. So what we did was develop concrete policy proposals that were intended to help Europe and the Commission to identify what do they need to tackle in order to really make the change happen. In that project, I think we had one of the most project advisory boards, maybe similar to what Michael had in the big RCI project, but really a lot of input by different RCI members who sent their policy experts and helped us fine-tune what we did and make sure that we cover all relevant aspects. And the idea is, of course, that this report is then used and taken up by everybody else to use. Main outcome and a bit the structure of the project. So I first put the structure of the project was a bit collect all instruments and measures that we can come up with. We then did an internal ranking, trying to do it a bit scientific by having a ranking formula, how we can rank it properly, and then input by all members. And then we had a top selection of instruments that we worked out in more detail with fact sheets. You see the result here on the right-hand side. So the top policy proposals that we identified are 10 in total. I'll go through them in a bit later on a different slide, but just that you get an understanding of what we did in this project and what we were trying to do. Just to give you a little bit insight into the project, this was the list of instruments and measures that we considered based on literature review, collecting by different recommendations, by different all literature we could find. What are options out there? What are policy measures out there that could be used? And it was also several internal brainstorming rounds of what might be options to consider. I will not go through them in detail, but it was then split a bit to structure it a bit into high-level instruments and more strategic decisions into very specific instruments that are tackling specific sectors or aspects. And then on the second, we have more. We have on the second slide stuff that focused on the sustainability and provide incentives by improving or asking for sustainability. We looked at tax policy instruments, direct financial supports, voluntary commitment, promotion of research and development, promotion of information and communication. And then we had a few where we couldn't really place them and put them in the group of other instruments and measures. But this was more or less our starting list where we started to filter down. And then this is the overview of what came out and what we recommended, highlighted here in orange. So we have two on a higher level, and then in these orange blocks, more concrete ideas what to do. And I think the main takeaway here is that we think on a higher level, it would be very useful if there would be a commitment to defossilization. So because right now we still see it's a bit split, the discussions on supporting bio-based, supporting recycling, supporting chemical recycling, and also supporting CCU in products. And an overarching strategic agreement or commitment, maybe comparable to climate targets, where we use climate change, climate emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, would be such a commitment to defossilize our carbon feedstock, which is therefore one of the proposals that we recommend. Another one was focused on the need for renewable energy. So here we suggested in order well, there's a lot of work being done currently on renewable energy and making energy in general more competitive and cost efficient for our companies in Europe in general. But we suggested here to combine it with defossilization, that companies get some administrative freeway, so to say, if they commit towards defossilization. So these two were higher level proposals, and then a bit more concrete, we looked into setting up targets for renewable carbon. So as the market pull, lead market creation measure, we ended up with focusing on targets because we believe they are one of the few options that are simple enough, but also provide the long-term stability to guarantee there is a market. So here we suggested targets. Financial support is the topic that will always be relevant to facilitate the transition. So we highlighted that as well. And then to increase the competitiveness, in particular here for CCU, but also for all products in Europe, producers in Europe compared to producers from outside of Europe, we tackled EU ETS and CBAM as an option where the Commission can adapt the methodology and the regulation to support the transition. And then we had a larger focus on access to feedstock. And here we really went deeper into waste as a feedstock as one option to improve or increase how much waste is actually available. We looked at local access. That was mainly then looking at agriculture in Europe and also the possibility for carbon capture and direct air capture in Europe. And then we also tackled the international trade of renewable carbon, based also on the understanding that the Commission, or that Europe has always been an importer of raw materials, and then often is the one doing the refining steps or improving steps and selling the product on in the export. So that were options to tackle the access to feedstock. And then finally, a topic that has always been in focus of our work is also to balance the regulation. There is still a non-level playing field between use of biomass or slash renewable carbon in energy materials. Michael just introduced you to the high quotas in the transport sector and aviation and maritime fuels. And we're of course trying to create a level playing field so that also materials have clear targets and similar strong policy frameworks that support the switch from fossil to renewable carbon. The whole project was very elaborate. So here on the right top-hand side, you see enabling conditions that we also discussed intensively in the project, but they were in the end, we agreed that they are not policy proposals, but it's more surrounding conditions that need to be tackled and enabled so that policy can do their work. That includes simpler stuff like definitions and data and having clear standards and certification. We mentioned work on sustainability criteria, life cycle assessment. We mentioned methodologies like mass balance and other methodologies to properly account for renewable carbon. There's the need for the right technology and infrastructure in place. There's stakeholder engagement. There's international cooperation. In all of that, you find in more detail in the orange ones and in a lot more detail described in this policy document. We believe it has quite some impact already on policy documents that were published this year. I did mention the national vision of the Dutch on sustainable carbon, which have heavily discussed also their vision with us and our policy proposals with us. And this final slide here on this project shows a little bit what we are trying to tackle with this policy proposal document, which is what we call the implementation gap. And it's in particular that there's a lot of good innovation at European level out there already for defossilizing the chemical industry, but it usually stops at the scaling up to the market level. And we believe what we've provided here is so to say, a blueprint to how can we bridge this implementation gap by, on the one hand, create the market demand, and on the other hand, ensure that all the key frameworks are in place. Access to feedstock is ensured in the competitiveness between fossil and non-fossil carbon, and also material use of non-fossil carbon and energetic use of non-fossil carbon are in the right place. Yes. Aligned with our policy work, we also published one position paper of note this year, which was on sustainability criteria for biomass, mainly directed towards use in polymers, chemicals, plastics, and packaging. The key idea here is, again, you must provide a long-term framework conditions to ensure biomass is used sustainably. There is already sustainable criteria out there in terms of what the Renewable Energy Directive implemented years ago, and there's a vivid landscape of certifiers out there who supply or who provide certification for biomass used under the red criteria. So we strongly suggest that policy should build on the existing red criteria as the foundation. But we are, of course, aware, and also in exchange with the Commission, again, there are some adaptations needed when you use biomass in the packaging sector. There are still some aspects to be considered when you look at the forest biomass sector. For example, there's the deforestation-free regulation, where you also have to take note of and to make sure that aligns properly. We've prepared these position papers to highlight that, yes, we need sustainability criteria for biomass, but of course, they only make sense when they're linked to incentives. So otherwise, you just have the burden to provide your biomass as sustainable, but you do not get any benefit. That is, I think, by now clear. And otherwise, there is some fine-tuning to do when you want to apply them to a more complex sector than the fuel sector in itself. I'm conscious of the time. We have 6 minutes, so this will be very brief. We had two publications on life cycle assessment as well this year. A large study, three-part study in the beginning of this year. It's mainly addressing LCA experts in providing them an overview of what are core elements in life cycle assessment you should keep an eye on when you do LCA and renewable carbon-based products. So if you have a colleague active in LCA, this might be of interest, because we have been comparing different frameworks, different standards out there. How do they deal with these aspects? and what is the impact of these aspects. And then in October this year, we published another study that was LCA related on increased methane emissions in crude oil and natural gas supply. That was strongly based on recent understanding due to satellite imaging that there were more methane emissions at crude oil and natural gas extraction than previously accounted for. That has been recently updated in the databases for life cycle assessment, the life cycle inventory databases like EcoInvent, like Carbon Mines, and Sphera is also working on that. And you do see the impact visualized here in this slide and the next. So this was before the updates. And then since the updates, there's some fine tuning going on. There's also some improvement with renewable energy supply. But overall, you see that there were significant impacts in the footprint of crude oil and crude oil derived products. And that also translates over to olefins and derivatives, so into the chemical sector quite visibly. Michael, we have 5 minutes and a lot of slides on the RCS and some more slides afterwards. I'm not sure if you can manage to do this in 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah, I try to be very fast. Direct to the next slide. We have developed in RCI together with TÜV Austria a new label, Renewable, and it's combining the share of biomass, CO2 utilization, and recycling in one logo. And you see here, these are ranges, and the ranges showing and also bio-based, bio-attributed. So everything which is not fossil combined in one label. If you see, for example, the group 6 to 9%, then the consumer knows 21% are fossil. The others are replaced by bio, CO2, or recycling. Next slide, please. The system is based on other certificates. You see on the right-hand side. They will be checked and confirmed every year, also expanded. So if you have already some certificates, it's easy to get the new one. And the last slide is, to be very quick, we have meanwhile 2 companies using it, BASF and IFF, but also a queue of new companies with new products, especially if we use products which have partly bio-based, partly bio-attributed, partly CO2-based or recycled. You can inform the consumer or the value chain with one label on this progress. So that was very fast, Christopher.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And then I have 3 minutes for a brief outlook. What you see on this slide is 5 projects that are still running in RCI. I'm really just briefly rushing through them. So we have one project that is looking to tackle biodiversity and sourcing of biomass while making sure that biodiversity projection is in place. That has been running since mid of this year. It's going to end in the first quarter or in the second 2 quarters of 2026. We have a project on policy barriers, supposed to complement the larger policy proposal report I just pointed out to you, looking to what is actively in regulation out there, creating hurdles and blocking the uptake of renewable carbon. We have an update of our case studies brochure where we look at peer-reviewed LCAs that provide clear indication and that renewable carbon-based products are already performing better than fossil counterparts on the market. And then we have 2 projects that are just kicking off late this year, which is an update on our carbon flows report, which is looking at the different carbon flows on global European level. Where's carbon coming from? Where is it used? How does it end up? We're trying to keep that up to date because it's a key publication from our end and has been used and referenced quite a lot by other stakeholders. And finally, we're working on a project that tries to harmonize a bit terminology. People are using clean carbon, alternative carbon, renewable carbon, sustainable carbon, and trying to figure out outside of Europe who's using it, and then try to develop supportive communication tools to increase awareness and align and harmonize the terminology of renewable carbon.
And the most important project we have forgotten here in the list is on mass balance.
No, this is coming here.
Coming. Sorry.
These were the running projects, and then coming up, Michael mentioned we have our annual meeting. We had it this year at the beginning of November, where we invite all our members to discuss different project ideas. And this time we roughly collected 30 ideas, I think. And then with the participants on site, we discussed them in detail. We asked our members to vote, which do you believe are the most relevant one for next year? And you just see the top results here without any numbers for next year, but just that you are aware next year we will, as Michael mentioned, tackle a larger project on mass balance and attribution. That is supposed to be a big project, and we are very, very actively looking for as much involvement as possible. We are looking at the project to navigate risk of using biomass. We will continue addressing SBTI and greenhouse gas protocol. We will look at impacts of what China is doing and how that translates over to the European sector. And we are zooming in LCA into recycling situations. So that is all coming up in 2026. And with 1 minute left, this is my last slide. We are, of course, aware there was a lot of content now for just an hour, but we really wanted to show how much is happening in RCI. We consider ourselves somewhere between a think tank and an interest group, where with the key strengths that we bring together science and policy, and then have a direct influence on the regulatory landscape and providing opportunities for sharing knowledge and building capacity. We do actively invite all of you to participate and join RCI because there's still so much to do, because we want to make sure that we have the entire value chains involved in actively helping us fine-tune and suggest the right things, and because we need to build bridges. So in case you're interested, in case you think what we presented to you is of interest and you would like to help actively shape these aspects going forward, we strongly invite you to reach out to us. We're happy to arrange a call and discuss with you in more detail what it means being part of RCI. And with that, I would look at Michael if you have any closing words, but we finished on point
Yeah,
at 3
one
p.m.
closing word. If you enter RCI in early next year, you can still be part of all the exciting projects coming. For example, this biomass risk navigator or the mass balance approach. So it's not too late. If you enter, you are part of the whole story. And what I find very exciting in RCI, that you are able to discuss in roundtables and working groups with other 40, 50 companies, so important issues also, especially for your company, on the same level with other companies. It is in the reality very rare possible. And the fee per year, we should mention, is for large enterprises 12,500, SMEs half of it. So it's a very low fee because we want to attract a lot of companies going with us the pathway of defossilization.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Thank you to all participants for sticking with us for the full hour. Enjoy the afternoon, enjoy the Christmas break. And as we mentioned, in case you're interested to learn more about RCI, please don't hesitate to reach out. Take care and see you next time.